Good evening. Welcome to William Baczek Fine Arts. I'm William Baczek. We're here to have a conversation this evening with Scott Pryor. It's going to be a pretty casual format. Scott and I have known each other for over 30 years. We're just going to talk about some landmarks in his and my relationship and the past and the present, and we're going to let you listen and participate if you'd like. It wouldn't be an exaggeration to say without Scott Pryor there would be no William Baczek Fine Arts. I first met you when I was downstairs at the Guild Art Center. I was the director of the Art Gallery, where I met many of you originally. And I remember seeing Scott come down the stairs and stand across the room, and I was kind of in awe because of course I knew who he was, and I probably felt like a lot of boys feel at the prom when they're seeing someone across the room that they're interested in, and shucks, for very different reasons. But Scott was the first artist to commit to showing at William Baczek Fine Arts. And because of his participation and because of his incredible reputation, I'm sure it made it a lot easier for other artists to feel like they wanted to come on this journey with us. I had been a picture framer at Pierce's Frame Shop up above Harlow Leather on Main Street, and Pierce's art store was purchased by William Muller, who owns the Guild Art Center. And I kind of came with the package when he bought Pierce's Frame Shop. And then Scott would come down to Pierce's Frame Shop. We had opened the Art Gallery at the Guild Art Center a few years before, and I remember Scott coming down to visit, and I remember getting up the nerve one day to walk up to him and ask if he would be interested in having an exhibit with us. And he looked at me and politely said no. And that was probably my first experience with the word no being a complete sentence.
There's a reason for that, you know. It wasn't just because I didn't like you.
Oh, I didn't take it personally. So that was where he and I met. And after I knew that I was going to be opening my own gallery, I asked him if he would be interested in exhibiting, and he said yes. We had developed a good professional relationship and a good friendship at that point. And I remember being very nervous and saying, well, are you going to give me enough paintings to stay open for a few years? And he said, yes, I will. And that was over 30 years ago.
What a sucker.
So yeah, I know, right?
Yeah,
so what were your memories of that, the Art Gallery?
Well,
and
for one thing, I didn't, when you asked me to be part of the gallery, I had a gallery in New York, I had a gallery in Boston. I was doing very well, and I didn't think I was going to have enough work. But it was when I got back from a trip to Italy and discovered finally how to do watercolors.
Oh.
Right?
Was that your first show?
Yes.
The
yes.
watercolors.
So I said, well, I liked the gallery. I liked the fact that you were showing local artists. And I knew that I could, put together a show of watercolors very quickly. Watercolor a day, a little watercolor. So there are like 25 paintings, and yeah, I had a show. And we did very well.
Yes.
And then the next show I remembered was just little paintings. So it wasn't like a big...
I remember building those frames.
Yes. Oh gosh, he used to curse at me. He came up with a design for a frame that was like, it required him, very physical. Anyway, yeah, so, my memories are very scattershot. So I know we've had a lot of shows. You say it's been decades. Okay, I believe you, but I don't have specific memories of specific shows. I know you were uptown for a while, and then you were down here, and here we are now.
I didn't remember that the first show was the watercolors. I was trying to remember. I remember begging people to buy one for about $700. So if anybody has one and they want to resell it, please come see me.
Yeah, that was fun. That was a fun show.
They started out very loose. They were very watercolory, and then his nature took over and they became more and more detailed. And then you started painting with gouache.
I did some gouache too, yeah.
Oil painters tend to like gouache because you can think like an oil painter in that you can put a light color over a dark color. Yeah, in watercolor, you paint from dark to light.
Yeah, you can build up like you build up an oil painting. It's opaque. gouache is opaque. So.
You remember a cowboy blanket, and then I remember them getting more and more detailed.
Yeah,
and
but
as
still
you-
not very detailed.
No, not
Compared to the
not
paintings.
compared to this.
Yeah.
Right,
Yeah.
right. At that point, Scott was a reluctant member of a group of artists that we call the Valley Realists.
I wasn't a reluctant member. There was never a club to be a member
Right,
of.
right.
What is everybody talking about?
And that's what we're going to talk about.
Those are my friends. Those are my friends, and we had a lot in common. And then the newspapers picked it up. You know, they love to give labels to things. So we became the Valley Realists, as if, you know, we met in a basement somewhere, you know, once a month and talked about realism or whatever. It was much more loose than that. I remember Greg Gillespie used to say, I hate the term realist. He didn't like that. He didn't like the term realist. He thought, and he was more than just a realist, that's for sure. So, you know, we were all different, but we all had this sort of connection. Greg was, you know, the main guy, the older, inspiring artist for all of us. And
So who met who, and how did that? Do you remember how that?
well, it was funny how I met Greg. I was just out of college, UMass, where I was a printmaker, and I started to paint. And I remembered that I had gone to a show down in New York at the Hirshhorn. It was a group show, and I remember the name of it was Human Concern, Personal Torment. And it was all these, like, you know, like angsty kind of people, a big range of artists. I remember Leonard Baskin was in it, R. Crumb, the cartoonist, was in it, sculptures, and one of Greg's paintings just caught my attention. I didn't know who this guy was. It was an Italian wall, you know, one of those trattoria paintings where just all kinds of weird stuff going on, you know, it was kind of cracking, and through the window you could see Rome, and anyway, so I went back down to New York when I started to paint a few years later to see his work at the Forum Gallery, and I just fell in love with this guy. I saw maybe 20 paintings, bought his first book, came back up to Northampton, and I think within a few weeks someone came over to my apartment, I was living here in town, and said, well, Greg Gillespie's having a show at Smith. And I went, really? What's he doing showing here? And they said, he just moved here. So I went to the show. A teacher from UMass introduced me to him, and I remember he was I think he just shaved his head. And he had that kind of spooky look, you know, which he could have. You know, he could be kind of scary looking, like kind of rough around the edges, but he wasn't rough. He was very gentle. So I remember shaking his hand, and it was just like very, very slight, you know, like hi. And
Oh, he had a weird handshake, that's
yeah, it's
right.
just,
Yeah.
you know, it's like you were, anyway. And that wouldn't have been enough, because I was a shy guy. I wasn't going to call him up or anything, but just a week later, we found each other in the stacks at Forbes Library. And I walked over to him, so we just met, and he says, I just started painting, and I like your paintings, can I show you my paintings? And he said, yeah, sure, come on up. So I drove up a week later, I remember it was the winter, and in the dark, finding his house, a farmhouse out in Haydenville, and there was nobody home. But then the headlights came up the driveway. It was Fran, you know. Oh, we're down eating, having supper down at the Williams Tavern. Come on down. So I went down. We went down. We're sitting at the table in this, you know, Williams Tavern. Williams, is that what it's called back then? I forget. But and across the way was Leonard Baskin. Okay, and I'm saying I never knew him either. And I remember Greg said, I can't eat this. He had a big steak. And I said, I can't eat this. And he gave it to me, so I finished his steak. and then we went up to the house, and he looked at some of the paintings I brought. And I don't remember him saying anything, but I remember Fran going, Greg, these look like your early paintings. These look like your early paintings. So anyway, that was the beginning of a very profound, for me, relationship. You know, everybody knows what happened to him, and it's not like I walk around all the time missing him, but when I think of the loss, you know, to the community of artists, my community, the people who really affected me, and he affected a lot of people. It's just too bad. He would be 83.
Gregory Gillespie committed suicide a little over 20 years ago, and it was Scott who called me on the telephone. And it was the only time I ever needed a chair. You know, when they say, "Are you sitting?"
Yeah.
It was Scott who gave me the news,
Yeah.
and
It wasn't expected. Yeah. It's like he always had troubles in his life and would complain easily, but he would also laugh easily. So you didn't see him killing himself. Didn't seem right. He just had a bad week, I think.
he was the type when he talked to you, he would stare. You know, sometimes you talk to someone and you're wondering if they're even listening because their eyes are just pouring into you. And his paintings, he's one of the artists that you get all that when you look at their paintings, especially the earlier figurative work. And Gregory's probably most well known for his self-portraits, and they move. They are very, very much
I'd
alive.
see him on the street, just bump into him and say, "Hi, Greg, how are you doing?" "Oh, not doing so good today." And he'd tell you. It wasn't like, "I'm fine," you know. It was like, no.
He was brutally honest.
Oh, gosh, sometimes he was, yeah. We won't talk about that.
So, Nanny and Rose was painted in 1983. It was first exhibited at the Alpha Gallery in Boston. It was immediately purchased, shown at a private apartment, and then donated to the Boston Museum of Fine
I
Arts.
didn't know that.
I didn't know that. I told you that story. I got in trouble
A
by...
private apartment?
Yes.
Okay.
I'll tell the story. I was in Miami at the art fairs a few years ago, and a lady walked by and saw Scott's monograph and said, "I saw that painting in my brother's apartment." And I didn't realize it was bad manners to say, "Oh, I'm not sure that's happened." She thought I was contradicting her, and she literally humphed and said, "That's not how it happened." I regained my composure and I said, "I'd love to hear that story." So she said the painting was, Nanny and Rose was purchased from the Alpha Gallery by her brother, who had a small party at his apartment to show it off, and then almost immediately donated it to the Boston Museum of Fine Arts. Yeah, believe me, I got humphed and publicly...
The Stones?
No, we won't. Well, I'll tell you later.
Okay.
So it's not an understatement to say that was a game changer in any young artist's career, to have a highly esteemed collector not only purchase a painting from your first show at Alpha?
No.
Okay.
No. I don't know which one it was, but...
An early show at Alpha, and then donate it to one of the most major museums in the country.
Yeah.
What did that do for you? Like, what did that do to you? What did it do for you? What was that like?
Well, it wasn't like I walked around all the time thinking, "Oh, I'm in the MFA, I'm in the MFA.
I would have.
Yeah, well, but when,
Have it on my-
when someone said they saw it, or they made this beautiful poster, and someone said, it's the most popular poster in their shop. Like, "Oh, that's neat." So I was aware of it, and I won't say it didn't sort of keep my back, keep my shoulders high and all that. It's like,
Did you think, "I've made it"?
oh, God, how many times have I thought I've made it?
Right. I mean, that's
Probably
human
did.
nature,
I
sure,
probably
sure.
did. It's like I said, it's just one of many, many times.
You don't have to answer this, but what did that do to this group of artists that are known as that? What was there a sense of like, darn him, or did you get any?
I don't remember that.
I mean, it's gracious to wish other people success, but it's
We-
also like being in a group that scratches lottery tickets and being like, "Oh, I'm so happy you won."
All of us being human beings, that's a natural impulse to
Sure.
feel jealousy or be competitive.
Did you feel that
I have felt that, sure.
at that moment?
I don't remember. I'm sorry. If somebody else did, Randy Deal sold a painting to the, Metropolitan, I went,
Right.
Of course.
Sure. Yeah, you all
But
had
I wouldn't do that in
amazing-
front of Randy. So it's natural.
Sure.
If anyone says they've never been jealous or competitive, they're not telling the truth. There's degrees of that, and I've known artists who are very competitive, and I know artists who don't seem to care that much. So
And
Me-
those are called liars, so.
Well, maybe I'm somewhere in between, I don't know.
Sure.
Yeah.
I mean, I think anybody, if I wasn't jealous and competitive, I wouldn't own a business. I wouldn't put things up for the world to see. I remember when I was in art school, I used to have the most fun putting my paintings on the wall, and it wasn't because I thought I was so good. It was, I really now see I was doing what I think I do best, which was accumulating a group of work, pounding nails in the walls and putting them on display, and I loved having shows. I didn't necessarily love having shows of my own stuff, but I liked the process, so.
He does a good show.
Well, thank you.
He takes it very seriously. He's really grumpy for a few days. He's hanging a show.
It's true. We had a dust up the day I hung this show, so, but
Yes,
like,
that's right, yes.
so, and look where
I went out to the car and then I came back in.
Yes, and here we are. I want to talk about choices, because if you look at Scott's paintings, they're remarkable paintings, but they're not about anything remarkable. And I've known Scott for over 30 years. I have nothing better to do than think about art, and I've spent a lot of time thinking about his paintings and why they're so interesting to me when they're not really paintings about anything that's interesting. We printed a catalog for Scott's work a few years ago, and I wrote a small essay for that catalog, and the essay is called "When Beauty Is Not Enough," and the gist of it was, we all love beautiful things. We love talking to someone who's beautiful, but we're all kind of hoping that they're shallow, because it just wouldn't be fair if they were interesting and beautiful. And I'll tell this story. I remember I went to art school in the late 70s, and realist painting was the opposite of what was beautiful, and it was the opposite of what was cool. People were putting piles of cigarette butts in the corner, and they were talking about them, and they were taking them very seriously. So I clearly remember after I got out of school, I went to Boston one day, and I was standing in front of a very well-known painting of Scott's Nanny and Ezra, with Ezra having a bath in the kitchen sink. And I remember I literally was standing there shaking my head no, thinking, pretty, pretty, pretty. And then I realized that the sunlight coming through the window, you could see Nanny's nude body through the dressing gown she was wearing, and I went, ooh, there's a lot of sex in this painting. And a whole nother layer became very evident to me, and then I continued to look at the painting, and another layer became evident to me, and I left that gallery convinced Scott was a very good and intelligent painter. I know he doesn't like when I say that's a smart painting, but I think his work is very smart. For that catalog, I wrote a small essay, like I said, and when I was thinking about what we were going to talk about tonight, a few sentences that I wrote popped into my mind, and it says, life happens, and it frequently can be brutal. Children are born, and sometimes tragic things happen to them. Adults have complicated lives, and the faces that they show to the world is not always the countenance they see in the mirror. We may mark our memories with moments of high and low, but most of the time, in truth, life is very ordinary. Finding magic in the commonplace is what makes an ordinary life extraordinary. I think Scott's paintings do that beautifully. They paint things that are very ordinary, very commonplace, but something about them makes him stop and paint them. And so what I want to talk about is how you pick what to paint.
First, I want to just say I stopped listening, and when you talked about children, sometimes things that not nice happened, I'm just paraphrasing. And I remembered that little Ezra in the sink almost died of a brain hemorrhage 10 years later.
I remember that.
It was a miracle that he survived, and that he's now a 32-year-old stud. He's more than that. Actually, he's a massage therapist during the day, and he's a stand-up comic at night. So, anyway, okay, what was your question?
I'm sorry if that was painful to...
Oh, no, it's good stuff.
Well, you paint ordinary things.
Memory.
What makes you stop and think that's a painting?
Well, they're all different. There's no one process. They're all usually familiar to me, places, things. I live with them, or I'm out looking and there are places nearby, and oftentimes the thing as an object, as a subject, will strike me. And then I will sometimes direct myself to finding conditions of light, like in a landscape, that will add a component to the normalness. So you'll see that there's a lot of twilight or early morning skies. These are times of the day, morning, before everything starts to happen. Early evening, when things stop happening, and there's conditions in the sky. It's I don't throw out the word miracle that easily, but there's something about what happens in that palette of the sky almost every day that just, I kind of go, oh, gee whiz. And I think what makes it even more poignant is the fact that these effects are there just for a minute or two. And that adds to the poignancy. So the conditions that I paint are usually very fleeting, and that's part of what I try to transmit to the viewer. Oftentimes the things themselves are not permanent. This place here, this is Whalen Park up near Fitchburg. Randy Deal and I used to go over there. We used to travel to parks when they were viable places and photograph them. And then they started to close up and decay. And I did some paintings of Mountain Park, and I drove here a few times on my way to my parents up in New Hampshire, and early in the morning, and there was a big chain link fence around it. It was all closed up. And I said, oh, gee. And I planned a trip very early in the morning, about a week later, and climbed over the fence and walked through this place all by myself. And it was right after a rainstorm. And it speaks for itself. This is a place, now it's no longer. A painting up front, it's the pink cabin in the snow. I photographed that place maybe 4 years ago. It's a series of cabins out in Great Barrington or Lee. Hubby's Cabins. And I made the painting, and I was driving out that way a few weeks ago. Where are they? Well, they've been torn down. So that's it. That's it for Hubby's Cabins, and I didn't even know it made the painting. So there's an arbitrariness to what I pick. Then they aren't necessarily beautiful things. A winter scene with it's the first snow. I mean, we just experienced the first snow. We know it is beautiful. But those are things just in the backyard, just left over from the summer before they get put away. There's a coating of snow all over them. It's with a metaphors perhaps about life moving on. We're alive and soon we'll be dead. It can be you can investigate the spiritual, philosophical component of all this, which I do a lot up here. I don't bore people usually with my thoughts, but those are things I think about.
I remember reading an interview with you a long time ago, and we've talked about a million things, but in the interview Scott said the landscape is the closest he can get to God, and I thought, Scott said that? And
well, I used to say things like that without knowing what I was talking about, really.
I mean, it's true. I don't know you to articulate those things.
Well, that was a
very
long time
often.
ago,
Yeah.
and it hasn't gone away. My thinking about that stuff hasn't gone away. And I'm not going to, I could do another whole lecture. It'd have to be a lecture. I have to write it out. I can't really think it out. It's that kind of thinking, about the meaning of life. The meaning of life. All I can think of after I say that is the Monty Python.
I saw that.
Of life, which, why not, This is the Grim Reaper. I make a joke about, so-and-so died. Oh, I'm glad the Grim Reaper passed by my door and knocked on his door. Yeah, it's like a sick joke, but that was Monty Python.
Well, there's definitely a spooky aspect to Scott's work. I remember a long time ago, I was talking with Stephen, and I said, I really like that. And he said, well, that's your tastes. And I said, well, what are my tastes? And he said, spooky but beautiful. And I think he hit the nail right on the head. And I think a lot of the work by Scott that I tend to gravitate to are a little spooky. Scott, a long time ago, a very early series of etchings that he did were turned into a beautiful boxed portfolio, were called Off Season. And they're black and white etchings. And they're places that we go when we're not there. There was I remember a big bowling pin, an abandoned bowling alley.
It was in Gardner, Massachusetts.
And tents, circus tents, and you think of circuses as very busy places. There wasn't a person in sight, and they were all, the title Off Season summarized it very well, because, you know, on season there's a bunch of people there, but what Scott was attracted to was when those people weren't there. There were places that our lives had occurred when we weren't there, and I know from a big part of my job is obviously talking about art, but a big part of my job is relaying to the artist what I hear. Because I hear some really good stuff. And what I hear most frequently in regard to Scott's paintings is, I've been there, or I know that, or I had those Tupperware cups, or Scott paints, you know, Tupperware, there's nothing elegant about a Tupperware cup until Scott Pryor paints it, just glowing with light, and his capabilities are to take those things, gummy bears and things that are very inelegant. I remember this a long time ago. When I was at the Hart Gallery, I was showing a watercolor painting. It wasn't Scott's, but a woman came by and said, "I'd never own a painting like that with such a cheap carpet in it." And I remember thinking, I would like, what makes you think about that? And yet he paints that subject matter and has the ability to create something that people find themselves in. I think
Those aren't my patrons.
No, because they like the Tupperware cups. We like the Tupperware cups. We like the gummy bears. We identify. What people say is, I've been there. I know that. I have that. That reminds me. And I think the art that resonates the most with us is the stuff that makes, I mean, we all love to think about ourselves, right? And it's stuff that makes you think about your own life, even if it's the deeper thoughts.
Before you move on, I was just looking at this painting, and one of the things I did to this painting, which wasn't in the actual scene, it's a place that people are all gone, but why is this light on? So I put that in there to kind of raise the question, you know. I do that a lot in houses that are like in the winter. Well, the cabin, the pink cabin, is clearly it's a summer place, and there shouldn't be anybody in there. But I made sure to put some steps in the snow, and I invented lights on the inside to, you know, kind of like, you know, so is there really someone in there? Are they cold? There's something a little off about it.
Well, for such realistic paintings, they're kind of the opposite of realist, because most of these places don't exist as we see them in the painting. These, you know, this is 2 or 3 different amusement parks that have been photographed and put together. Or something I wanted to mention, Gregory Gillespie was a notorious repainter. I remember you told me a story, I think one of his paintings had some damage to it, so the collector brought it back to him to fix. And he kept working on it and working on it, to the point where when they got their painting back, it looked nothing like what they
There's
had
many
purchased.
painters in history who would do that.
Oh, sure.
Yeah.
I mean, I love watching, what is it, Fake or Fortune, or those PBS shows, and they try to authenticate a painting, so they x-ray it, and they see 3 or 4 other paintings underneath it. And, you know, this painting used to have a neon sign next to it that said Days Cottages, and because this is Days Cottages in North Truro. And it's been repainted. These trees weren't here in this painting when it was created a year ago, and for spatial reasons, Scott painted the trees.
This was just too prominent. The geometry of this roller coaster just kept on going to it, and I didn't want to keep going to it, so I covered it. It's a better painting.
So, do you feel that's why you tend to repaint? You want to make it better?
Of course.
Yeah. Why over?
I'm going to make this worse.
I remember you brought in a painting that you did like in the 70s, and we had an argument. He goes, "I'm just gonna," and I went, "No, it's a time capsule from the 1970s," and it was Scott's impulse to
Make it a better
tickle
painting.
it, right,
Yeah,
right.
50 years later, almost 50 years later. Yeah. That happens a lot when I visit old paintings.
So that's the commercial side versus the artistic side.
I don't have the time really to rework too many paintings.
Right,
so-
right. I'm always saying, do another one. Don't
Yeah.
repaint an old one. Do a new one.
Yeah, yeah.
So you think that that's your tendency to repaint is to make them better?
Well, yeah.
Did you have an inkling when you painted it wasn't quite right, or?
Geez, that's a hard question to answer. Sometimes I just want to be done even though it could be better.
Okay.
Sometimes if a painting doesn't sell, then I'm reminded again and again, it's still there. I'm going to rework it. So it depends.
That's my next question.
The best thing is to sell a painting just like that.
Right.
Even if it isn't perfect.
Well, we talk a lot about that, and I mean, when I get a painting, I look at it with a few different eyes. I wear a different hat, whatever term you want to give it. And of course, I stay open because I sell paintings. I'm open because I love paintings, but I stay open because I sell them. And Scott and I have talked a lot about the commercial side of it, and I want you to talk about that.
Well, I will say that there's only a few people, Will probably being the best of them, who gives me good advice. And sometimes it's repainting a painting, but more often than not, it's like I work on these, I take a lot of photographs, I combine them, I change them. Sometimes I will show them to Will, and he'll say, that's a little off, or that my eye goes to that spot, not in a good way. And he's usually right. So I very much appreciate what he adds to my art. That painting with Nellie and Ezra, two of my kids, over in the corner there, has gone through maybe 5 iterations. And Will never liked any of them. I said, I like it, I kind of liked it. Well, I didn't sell it, and in the end I worked on it again. And now I really like it, and I think he likes it better.
A lot.
And it's a very personal painting, and the interesting thing about that painting is Nellie, the girl in the center, is actually 5 years younger than the baby Ezra. So it reversed their ages.
Ezra's older than Nellie.
Yeah, yeah. So they were just interesting photographs that I've been wanting to put in a painting for a long time. So I got put together in that painting.
I remember the first time Scott forced me, and I was at his studio, and I was just, oh wow, here I am. And he was finishing a painting of Nanny sitting in a corner in sunlight coming across her face at an angle. You probably remember that painting. And Scott said, what do you think? And I remember thinking, I can never, it's great. And he goes, no, really, what do you think? And I went, it's beautiful. And I remember thinking, this is Scott Pryor. Well, Nanny's toes looked too long to me. And finally, he got impatient with me, and because he could tell. And I said, her toes are too long. And he said, well, she has long toes. And I said, well, but this is a painting of toes. And you might know that Nanny's naturally long-limbed, but when we're looking at a document of that, it looks odd. And that broke the ice.
Yeah, a few times, even though I work from photographs, and literally, this is the anatomy is correct according to a photograph. Sometimes just the way it's posed or whatever, it doesn't look right, even though it is right. And I know a few times you said, she looks like her arm is amputated. Oh, what? Well, yes, it does. So I had to...
In photography class, I studied photography in school, they teach you never crop a photograph, a figure at the limb. You want to crop forearm or mid-arm, but you never want to crop at a wrist or an elbow or a knee. And it was what you're talking about.
He's smart. He went to art school.
Yeah. Look where
I never took an
and I became a bartender. Look where it goes. One of the things that's changed a lot, and I was talking with a few people at the beginning of the evening, when I opened my gallery 24 years ago, there was no internet, certainly not as we know it. There was no Instagram. The gallery now has an Instagram account with over 10,000 followers. We have it, this is being recorded for our YouTube channel. Every painting I sold was to someone who walked in the gallery and bought it, and I developed a personal relationship like I have with many people here in that process. Well, now in 2019, over 70% of my sales are internet. I'm grateful that my gallery is Amazon proof because this is the only one out there that it is. But Scott and I have talked a lot about how things have changed a really lot. I remember, did we create your Instagram account with each other?
You helped me probably.
I remember when I first mentioned it, Scott, he didn't like the idea very much, but Instagram's a great way. I have literally found artists that I now represent on Instagram from Riga, Latvia. I now show an artist from Riga, Latvia. So how do you feel about those changes and about that evolution?
Well, it's a big subject. You know, I grew up in the 50s, 60s reading science fiction, and now I feel like we're kind of living in science fiction. You know, we haven't had World War III. The robots aren't, you know, on the street rebelling. We don't fly around in hovercraft. But, you know, I saw 1984 come and go. I saw 2001 come and go. And now 2019 is like, back in the 50s, that was the year when, you know, we were in another universe, or, you know, all this wacko stuff. But no, we're here. This is 2019. I tend to be, as a person who's experienced, you know, the changes that have happened over 70 years, kind of reacting like a grumpy old man. Okay? A lot of, you know, it's just a knee-jerk response, okay? And it's very typical of an old person to be resentful, maybe, or to doubt the new technology. But I kind of go back and forth and back and forth. And also because I like science fiction, I'm very curious about what's coming down the road. And just the other day, I sort of put something together, which is very interesting. I was reading a biography of Martin Luther, early 1500s. One of his good friends was Lucas Cranach, a German painter, and he did portraits of Martin Luther. Of course, he was, turned the world upside down, the Western world, the world of religion, organized religion, upside down, sort of inadvertently became like a superstar. And how it happened is interesting because just around that time was the invention of the movable type, the Gutenberg press, this concept of reproducing things, what started to really pick up. So he wasn't just a local phenomenon. Lucas Cranach did some portraits of him. They were turned into broadsides with some of his sayings and disseminated all over Europe. Okay, to the point where this poor guy who was under an interdict from Rome, if certain people got their hands on him, he would have been sent down there and burned at the stake. He had to go from town to town. He did a lot of traveling, had to grow beard, and he wore like a military outfit, a soldier. But ahead of him were all of these broadsides of pictures of him, and people knew him when he came into town. So he was, comparable to today? He was a poster child, a rock poster child of the 1520s. His image went viral.
Like a viral video, yeah.
That's history. It's something that we don't really think about. In its own level, it's not that different than what's going on now. It's just that was then, this is now, and who knows what's going to happen. But I thought that was very profound to find out he became well known because of this new technology.
When I first met you, you used to take scissors and cut things out. Scott's a very good photographer, and he said many times, if you're going to be a good painter like this, you need to be a good photographer. But he would literally take his photographs and use scissors and cut things out and kind of make collages and then paint that. He'd photograph Steve, he'd photograph Leslie, he'd photograph John, he'd photograph a beach, and the painting would be Steve, Leslie, and John standing on the beach. Now with technology, he's very good at Photoshop. I'm good at Photoshop. He blows me away. So this whole aspect of times changing and technology changing.
Well,
I
don't
mean,
tell me all of the artists through history wouldn't have loved Photoshop.
Absolutely.
You know, they, no.
Except the church would have burned you at the stake for using a scientific instrument to
Probably,
assist in your...
Yeah. It's okay.
Isn't that the
They
theory
don't do
with-
much of that anymore, so it's
Right,
good.
yeah. Yeah, I guess the theory is that Vermeer had lenses that he used to assist, but because of the church, any kind of scientific instrument would be heresy. So he kept that a secret, and a lot of people think, oh, well, he was an artist, he kept his techniques secret, but it was actually the science part of it that he kept secret. And Scott uses Photoshop very, very well, and so what used to be scissors and ectochrome photographs are now done on a computer.
Very early on, I thought I was going to be an astronomer. In high school, built telescopes. I took pictures. I won science fairs. I came to UMass because they had a good astronomy department. Well, I was lousy at calculus. So, and that was the day, 67, 68, when you were just supposed to have a good time. So I always did art, so I did art. But I've always been... You know, a lot of the great artists in history, Leonardo, Michelangelo, they were scientists too. And when you think of it, the pursuit of science and the pursuit of art is like originates from an interest in the natural world. Whether it's how things work, how to make things better, understanding the nature of light. This is all sort of the same intellectual process, and so I've never really thought it was strange that I switched from astronomy to painting.
Your earliest paintings had weathermen and telescopes,
Yeah, it was
particularly. I had an early one from the 70s that had a man with a telescope and one of those beautiful tabletops that were very much like Gregory's.
Well, I did a
tabletop.
My work was very different back then. It was very influenced by Greg, so there's disparate objects in the still lives.
Yeah, this painting of Scott's appeared in a folk art auction in Georgia, and someone I know who is a folk art collector said to me, "There's a Pryor painting in this auction," and it's for someone like me who's putting together the story of Scott Pryor with their paintings. This was just everything you want in an early Scott Pryor painting. The influence of Gregory Gillespie, a man with a telescope, and darn it, someone was bidding against me. And it only takes two in an auction, and finally I told the woman on the telephone, please get rid of that other person because I'm going to get the painting. And
you got it.
I did get it.
Yes, I remember that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You were happy and surprised when you saw it.
Yeah. Yeah.
So if anybody sees an early Scott Pryor with a man with a telescope, that tells the story of what he used to study in college.
Yes.
So
If anybody finds, what do they do?
buy it.
Oh.
Give it to me.
Yeah, I was going to say.
Give it to you.
Give it to me
Give it
first.
to
yeah.
you.
Yeah.
Scott's getting to that age where those early paintings are much more meaningful now. And
Well, yeah. 50 years of painting and probably 1,000 paintings.
is that what you?
I don't know, something like that. Yeah.
I remember a long time ago I said to Scott, "You paint fast."
Yeah.
And he didn't think that was a compliment. And he said, "When you feed your family with your paintbrush, you don't have the luxury of taking a long time."
Well, I used to have the reputation among that group of the Valley Realists. It's the fastest brush. I had the fastest brush.
You are fast. But he made it very clear to me. He taught himself to be fast, and he didn't have the luxury. Scott's a very atypical painter, and that he doesn't do an underpainting or grisaille, or he starts at the top and he works down. And with the still lifes, the windowsills, the bottle or the flowers will be blank, and then he'll fill that in. And
There are certain things that require a lot of attention and detail, and then there's other areas where it's looser and more fun.
landscapes. You love painting the
It's
grass.
fun doing all of this down here. It's not fun doing these lines out
Right,
here. That's hard work,
Right.
getting it right. But
So what's left to paint? What do you, as things change, as you change? I mean, his reputation was based on painting kids and family, and
maybe
kids grow
grandkids.
up. And,
I don't know.
Yeah, grandkids. Okay.
I don't know.
What
These are
still
not-
interests you?
Well, these are not atypical of my work. I imagine that I'm not a, I don't do, I don't look for changes. I don't look for the excitement of changes. I like the comfort of consistency. There's a few areas I'd like to spend a little more time, maybe watercolors. I've done over the years some very ambitious large-scale pencil drawings. Maybe that. I don't know. I really don't know. You know, I have a few have-tos in the next few months. I have to do a landscape for him for his landscape show. I know I'm doing that. But I don't know. I'm not really sure.
Scott has a library of thousands of beautiful photographs, and some of my favorite time is when we look at those together, and they're not all supposed to be paintings, but some of them are like, oof. I look at them and I think that's going to be a beautiful
I
painting.
go back through, I have a big collection of photographs. I used to take Polaroid photographs a
Yeah.
lot.
Max and I were talking about that today.
Yeah, and I go through those sometimes and I see them differently and might pull something out.
Scott's oldest son, Max, who's 35. I think I asked him 36. He was in the gallery today, and we were looking at paintings of him as a little kid, and it was I mean, I know Scott well, but I know his kids because I know Scott, and it was very interesting talking to this adult man who's in all these paintings as a little kid and listening. He was telling me when you moved from Olive Street to Ravel, and he knew it was really, because Nanny and Rose was painted in a house on one street, and I met Scott and Nanny shortly after they moved to the house that I knew them in, and Max was filling in these beautiful gaps in the history. I was very fortunate to have a very nice conversation with him today.
Yeah, I've been doing this long enough, and that painting is, he was actually, Nanny was pregnant in that portrait, Nanny and Rose. That gives you an idea how long ago that was. And to know that it's still, well, I'm organizing right now, in the process of organizing a retrospective that's going to happen down on the Cape at the Cahoon Museum next year and a half from now. And they're going to borrow back Nanny and Rose and a bunch of other paintings, and I'm actually going to get the very first painting I did of Nanny. It's in the book, in the bedroom, sitting over to the side.
Yep.
It's down in Florida. I found out who owns it. I'm going to contact them about borrowing it. The museum's happy to, do the cost of shipping. So that's going to be
Wow,
a
that'll be-
real reunion from.
And that's the first painting you ever painted of Nanny?
Yes.
Wow.
And it was the first and only painting I did in this apartment. 6 by 8 feet, I think, and I found out that it wouldn't go down the stairway. So I had to cut the stretcher and fold it in half. I learned my lesson with that one. Check to make sure you can get it out of the
Yeah,
house.
you guys made big paintings back then.
Yeah. So that's exciting. That will be it's the whole museum. It'll probably be about 50, 60 paintings.
I'll be there.
But I get the paintings. I'm probably going to borrow some paintings of yours.
Happy to.
Okay.
Well, I want to thank you very much.
Sure. Maybe people have questions. I don't
Yeah,
know.
does anybody have anything that they'd like to ask or contribute, or?
I saw that hand right there first.
Thank you. Why did you paint out the Days Cottage sign and add the towels?
I think in the end it was too distracting. And it wasn't, compositionally, it was sort of on the edge. So it was more of a balance to have I think it was just composition. Psychological composition, physical composition, a lot of that stuff goes together.
I like the fact that those of us who know Days Cottages don't need the sign.
Yeah, well, the sign is actually there, but it's only next to one house. I think there's like 30 houses, and then there's the sign that says Days Cottages, but each cottage does not have it. Yeah, so.
Thank you.
When you were talking about the painting with Ezra and your wife with the see-through aspect, how does he feel about that painting, seeing his mother in that sense?
Oh, I haven't really quizzed him.
I'm
They're quite
That
used
would
to
be curious.
nudity. There's a painting I did of Nellie when she was very, very little, but she's stark naked, okay, and she's standing there looking, it's in the book, looking at, this mane of long blonde hair with the sun back, and she put it on her Facebook page, so,
Yeah.
it's
Well, I
not.
was curious how he felt about seeing his mother depicted that way, more than, or did he even care?
I don't think, he
just
grew up in
sometimes
a house of
taken.
artists and art,
Yeah.
and there might have been, a year or two when he might have,
Some
adolescence.
kids, they
like,
look at their parents.
my mother
like, "Oh,
has
really?"
never been naked, no.
Yeah.
But, before that he didn't care, and after that he was smart enough to realize it's just life.
Yeah,
Hasn't been an issue.
yeah.
Occasionally Nanny would feel a little awkward about being naked, but in the end she let me do it and put it in for everybody to see, so
Yeah,
wasn't an issue really.
yeah. It's just funny, I'm thinking of him as this
It's-
36-year-old man now looking at his mother, who's
It's-
probably, just this beautiful woman and,
It's subtle.
yeah.
It doesn't hit you in the face.
Yeah.
Like Will said, he noticed it after a while. Now, I intended it.
Yeah,
I loved painting the idea of, children, mother and father, the children, sex is not something that's invisible, it's there. And to be able to mix all of that together in one painting, I think there's a lot of truth there.
yeah.
The arbitrariness of a woman bathing her child in a sink. We used to do that. She turns around and looks at the viewer, which is strange in its own right, but there's a psychological interaction there, and it just so happens that the sun is going through her thin,
Yeah,
it's reality.
yeah. It's a beautiful moment.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. Sure.
I took my wife and I took a
I
watercolor
remember, sure, yeah.
class with you.
Barry.
Barry, you're right. My family's over there. It's a little hot over there. But I remember I was struck by the objects that you would present and start to paint. And one of my reactions was the persistence, that you would stay with it, make it work, deal with the lighting. I'm curious, are there sometimes that you will start something or get an idea for something and then decide, I just don't want to keep doing this, I'm going to bail on it, or do you tend to more or less make it
I
work?
usually, it's very considered before I start.
Yeah,
So I do a lot of thinking. I work out very different combinations. I have a lot of maybe paintings that never turned into paintings. But once I've started a painting, I will finish it. Sometimes I'll go back and rework parts, but I've never really, like I said, I consider ahead of time
Yeah.
a lot. Yeah,
thank you.
sure.
When you capture the light in the sky in your paintings, which you do a lot, are you, you're a very good photographer, are you capturing that light in that scene in a photograph and then painting it often? Or is it more that you find a scene that you're captivated by and you're familiar enough because you're such a astute observer of the sky by now in different lights and situations that you can kind of pop a sky into the background of the
Both. Depends. I will add skies to paintings that don't have skies. Sometimes the subject, the quality of the sky is so predominant that it's and I want to use it, it's a challenge to find an equivalent, balanced landscape. So, it's not one way of doing it. I do take a lot of photographs. I don't literally copy them. Seeing the skies here, I oftentimes will take parts. Sometimes I'll accentuate. I'm looking at that painting of the balloons over there. Well, that happens. That kind of blue along with that kind of orange, that happens. It lasts a minute maybe. So I probably pick that out, accentuate it a bit because it complements the balloons nicely.
And I just thought of this in regards to repainting. There's a painting that Scott did when he and Nanny got back from Italy one year, and it was Nanny in the bathroom.
Oh, yeah.
And Italian bathroom tiles are bigger than Americans. And Nanny's standing in front of the tiles because the grid of tiles behind her was larger than we are accustomed to seeing. It threw the whole scale of her figure off. And you wouldn't think of that until you see the finished painting. So he repainted the tiles, resolved that part, but there was still something about the painting of Nanny in the bathroom, and the finished painting now is Nanny standing on the beach. And it went through, I think, 3 major phases.
I only remember
before-
the two, in the bathroom and then on a beach.
Okay.
Yeah, I only remember.
I remember the tiles clearly because
Yes.
we were looking at it and there was something about a sense of scale.
They were
with-
alien tiles.
Yeah,
To
yeah. Well, she looked like an alien because
Yeah.
or very small.
No, that was
so.
that was an example of pre-computer days when I cut her out and pasted her to a piece of paper and made a drawing of the beach
Right.
from another photograph, and yeah, that was a very successful. It's in the book.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. So someday, if they ever X-ray that finished painting, they'll see strange things back there. So, hey.
There's a quality.
Oh, I'm sorry.
There's a quality of the light that I would have thought involved underpainting. And I was interested when you described sort of painting from one section of the painting to another. I wonder if you could talk a little bit about your technique in getting that backlit glow, the way you paint it without sort of doing whole...
I just really look very carefully before I start, and I try to understand the quality of the light, what it does to, say, a bottle or a flower, and I have the photograph, and I try to get it right the first time. And like I said, before I start the painting, I'm well aware of the composition, the color composition, the light. So, it's something sort of mechanical about it. I'll confess that. But it's how I make paintings. And I do repaint sometimes.
You know what Scott calls mechanical, I mean, do you know what the value of a color means? It's the way a color, the value here of painting the sand, you've got to get that color just right in relation to that color to make it believable.
Well, I'm good at mixing
and
colors.
He's good at that.
I'm good at mixing colors, yeah.
Yeah, your
That's
colors.
the fun part.
I think of an artist's colors or an artist's palette, it's like a singing voice. It's what you got. You can train it, but some people have a very high-pitched voice, and some artists paint with very acidic colors, and the colors that come out of him naturally.
You see, the lower part of that painting has, a sort of brownish color. It's all like gray, okay? Gray, but with a brownish tint in the sand, a slight bluish tint in the concrete, and then a slight greenish tint in the little bit of foliage there. Very close, but the differences are very important.
Right.
Sorry, there was somebody who, yeah, you and then you, yeah, yeah.
I just had a question, Scott.
I'm trying to do it in order when I see the hands.
How do you choose which paintings to make prints of? Do you and Will decide, or because like
Which kind of prints?
Community gardens, like I see in the hospital?
Those are digital prints.
Yeah,
yeah.
and do you choose the particular? Was there a painting of that first community gardens? I assume there was.
The one in
yes.
the hospital is from a painting. It's a
Right.
print from a painting.
Right, and how do you choose which ones you're going to?
What I think would be most suitable.
Most suitable.
Prints are commercial.
Yes,
Yeah.
so
Yeah,
that's
we-
why I
they
say
are
you
creative,
probably would
yeah,
enter into
yeah.
what might sell.
If I remember correctly, didn't they commission that for the hospital, or?
I think the hospital asked for a print
Yeah.
of that to be made.
I mean, we happen to have one of those too, and then two towels was
Yeah, yeah.
popular. So you kind of help each other decide which
A
ones
lot of
to
that
do.
too is, did I interrupt you? A lot of that too is, in order to create a good quality digital print, you need a very high resolution digital image. And not all of the paintings that Scott has were photographed with a high resolution digital
Well,
camera.
last 10, 15 years, most
Right.
of them are high resolution.
Right.
yeah.
Right, I mean, they used to be offset lithographs, and then they used to be called iris prints, and when they were first created, because
Right.
iris prints came off of an iris printer, like we call all photocopies Xeroxes. Well, there's Canon and there's Brother, but we call them Xeroxes. Well, when digital prints were first created, they came out of iris printers, and so they were called iris prints. Well, that didn't sound good enough, so some galleries call them giclées. Well, we don't refer to them as giclées. Giclée does not translate well overseas, and I won't be indelicate, but in France, it's not a word that one repeats in polite company. And we call them what they are, which is archival inkjet prints.
See, as a former printmaker, I think all of that stuff is bogus. Part of me thinks that way. Of course, I'm willing to make prints. It's a nice way to reproduce paintings.
But they're not hand.
But when you say print, I was a printmaker. I wiped the etching plate and ran it through a press. But anyway, that's neither here nor there. I'm more in that. I still do prints now and then. The old, etchings and lithographs. See.
In looking at your show, there are very few human figures.
Mm.
And maybe in recent years, there are fewer human figures. Are
Well,
you
speak-
less interested in?
I think about it. Well, it's in the show here, the one of Nanny in the backyard. It's fairly recent. It's a different time in my life. Those are all very personal, and they really had to do with young marriage, young children. I'm not going to say that that period is past. Every now and then I kind of get an idea. I just haven't been able to pull the trigger on it. They usually are large paintings, and that requires a commitment that's a bit harder to do these days. I'm just talking about pure market, financial considerations. If I'm going to start a painting that's going to take me 3 or 4 months, I'm not quite there where I can just paint it and put it in the closet and move on to the next painting. Yeah. But we'll see. I still have some life left in me. We'll see.
Is that a hint?
Yeah.
Does anybody else have anything they'd like to ask or contribute?
Yeah, I'm just wondering, when did you realize that you wanted to become an artist?
Well, professionally or just, I always did art. I always did art.
Always?
Yeah.
When you were little?
Yes. And I did science too, and they were actually very much connected. When I was, well, this has been an interesting year because it was this past summer was the 50th anniversary of a lot of stuff. Okay, not to mention it was a run-up to me turning 70. I actually really had a hard time with this past summer because 50 years ago, I was 19 years old and was washing dishes in the summer at a restaurant and quit to move out to Provincetown. It was a leap of faith, and I hung watercolors on the fence. And wow, I sold them. And I won't say at that moment I was a professional artist, but that was the first time I realized I'm not going to have to wash dishes again professionally. I can make art, and that was 50 years ago. This past summer, it was a crazy, Provincetown, the moon landing. I went to Woodstock 50 years ago. Bought my first car. I came out to UMass. I got my first girlfriend, and wow, I'm out of here. I'm on my way.
Nice.
So that was a moment, sort of.
Scott gave me that. I have a black and white photograph. It's actually on the gallery's Instagram account, but it's Scott in Provincetown in 1969 with his paintings on a fence that he shared with a French-Canadian artist, and there's a little sign on the fence that says "Watercolors by Scott Pryor," and it's a great document.
Yeah.
And he said after a couple days he sold all the paintings. And
Well, I didn't sell all of them, but I was able to pay for my rent, and it was a wonderful 2 months. And I remember I was paying in $20 bills and American Express checks, and I had the pile in my bed. I had one room, a room, shared bathroom, and that was it. I looked on the ocean and the beach, and I'd come home and, whoa, this is so much fun. I'm selling paintings, and I have $20 bills. I can buy a car now.
And like so many artists, Provincetown has a real,
Yeah, well, in some ways it hasn't changed that much. It's a very special place. Yeah, and emotionally very important to me. 50 years ago.
and Cape Cod is surrounded on 3 sides by water, so the light is bouncing up. So for someone like him, it's the perfect location to photograph light and how it changes subtly.
Mhm.
Can you just say again where the show is going to be?
The Cahoon Museum of American Art in Cotuit.
Okay.
Yeah. It's a great small museum, and they have a new young director who wants to do old stuff and new stuff. Because it's a museum about old stuff, you know, Cape Cod-y old stuff. But they have this new wing that's, so it's great. And Cape Cod needs more of that.
Well, I'd like to thank everybody. I feel very grateful and privileged for my friend Scott Pryor to be here tonight.